history's deadliest women warriors. The French soldiers who marched into Dahomey in 1892 had faced indigenous armies before, but nothing prepared them for what emerged from the morning mist. The warriors who charged their lines moved with lethal precision, wielding machetes that glinted in the dawn light. It wasn't until the forces clashed that the French made a startling discovery. These elite fighters were women. The Dahomey Amazons were just one of history's most formidable female fighting forces, groups so feared that their very names struck terror into their enemies' hearts. From the frigid skies over Nazi Germany, where the night witches struck in perfect darkness, to the Shield-Maidens who terrorized medieval Europe's coastlines, history's deadliest women shattered not just enemy lines, but every preconception about the art of war. These are their stories, tales of courage, cunning, and combat prowess that generals still study today. Some fought to protect their homeland, others for glory, but all left an indelible mark on military history that we're only now beginning to fully understand. The Dahomey Amazons, Africa's fearless female warriors. The burning village cast an orange glow across the battlefield as Naniska, commander of King Gezo's elite female guard, led her 1,000-strong unit through the tall grass. The year was 1832, and the Dahomey Amazons were about to demonstrate why European colonists called them the most feared women in history. Their target was a fortified Yoruba settlement that had resisted 3 previous assaults by male warriors. By sunrise, it would be ash. Each of these women had survived a selection process more brutal than anything their male counterparts endured. From childhood, they were trained to ignore pain, breaking thorny branches across their bodies until they no longer flinched. Their graduation ceremony involved scaling walls covered in razor-sharp acacia thorns, a test that left many bleeding but created warriors who could infiltrate any fortress. Palace records show that those who completed the training were awarded the title Ahosi, the king's wives, though this was a political designation rather than a marital one. They were married to war itself. Their weapons training defied conventional military doctrine. While European armies of the time emphasized formation and volley fire, the Amazons mastered a fluid style of combat that combined close-quarters machete work with precise musket handling. They could reload their firearms while charging at full sprint, a skill that would later astonish French military observers. Their signature tactic was the mirror formation, fighting in synchronized pairs, each warrior moving in perfect concert with her partner, creating an impenetrable defensive screen while advancing. But it was their psychological warfare that truly set them apart. Before major battles, they would conduct the Blood Oath Dance, a ceremony so terrifying that some enemy armies retreated upon merely hearing its drums. Witnesses described the Amazons cutting captured panthers' throats and drinking the blood, a display meant to demonstrate their transcendence of human limitations. They would then march into battle singing, "We are the king's women, men flee when they see us coming. When we take the field, we conquer or we die." The Corps' most devastating deployment came during the EGBA campaign, where they breached the supposedly impregnable walls of Abeokuta. The male army had failed 3 times to scale these defenses, but the Amazons developed an innovative human pyramid technique, creating living ladders that allowed them to pour over the walls like a deadly tide. The defenders, who had prepared for conventional siege warfare, found themselves engaged in brutal close-quarters combat with warriors who had trained specifically for this moment. Their reputation was such that when French colonists began their incursion into Dahomey territory in the 1890s, several officers requested transfers after hearing they would face the female corps. One French Foreign Legion officer wrote home, "These women are more fearsome than any male troops we have encountered. They have a superhuman tolerance for pain and zero fear of death. I would rather face a battalion of German infantry than these she-devils." The legacy of the Dahomey Amazons extended far beyond their military achievements. They established one of history's first formal military training programs for women, developed revolutionary tactical innovations still studied today, and demonstrated that the limiting factor in creating elite fighting forces was never gender. It was training, dedication, and the willingness to transcend conventional limitations. Their influence can be seen in modern special forces training worldwide, where their psychological conditioning techniques and close-quarters combat methods continue to be referenced in military academies. Night Witches, Soviet Angels of Death. Marina Raskova's aircraft was plummeting through the darkness over the Urals, its instruments frozen and useless in the bitter Russian winter of 1941. As the Soviet Union's most famous female pilot and navigator, she had trained for emergencies, but not for what she was about to propose to her two young crew members, jumping blind into the night without knowing what lay below. This white-knuckle rescue would later become the founding legend of the most feared night bombing regiment in aviation history. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment began as a desperate gambit. With the Wehrmacht pushing deep into Soviet territory, Raskova convinced Stalin to let her form 3 all-female air regiments. What she didn't tell him was that she planned to revolutionize aerial warfare. While male pilots relied on modern PE-2 and IL-2 aircraft, Raskova chose the antique Po-2 biplane, a wooden training aircraft that barely flew faster than a parachutist falls. This seemingly suicidal choice would prove to be tactical brilliance. These ancient biplanes had 3 critical advantages. They could fly slower than the stall speed of German fighters, their wooden construction made them nearly invisible to radar, and their maximum load of 2 bombs meant they could make countless runs in a single night. The women of the 588th transformed these limitations into strengths, developing a signature tactic that would earn them their infamous nickname. They would cut their engines at high altitude, gliding silently over German positions like lethal ghosts. The only warning their targets had was a soft whooshing sound, like a witch's broomstick, seconds before the bombs fell. Nadezhda Popova's record-setting night stands as testament to their effectiveness. In one June evening over Taman, she flew 18 consecutive missions. The Germans below never realized they were being bombed by the same crew repeatedly, believing instead that they faced a massive Soviet air armada. By dawn, Popova had dropped nearly 2 tons of explosives, destroyed a German crossing point, and started numerous fires that illuminated enemy positions for Soviet artillery. She accomplished this while flying an aircraft that had more in common with the Wright brothers than the Luftwaffe's best. The psychological impact on German troops was devastating. They began to report spectral aircraft that appeared from nowhere, piloted by Soviet witches who had sold their souls for the power of flight. The nickname Nachthexen, Night Witches, spread through German ranks like wildfire. Wehrmacht soldiers claimed these witches could turn invisible, that silver bullets couldn't kill them, that they sprinkled sleeping powder over their camps before attacking. The reality was even more remarkable, These women were flying without parachutes, using handheld compasses and stopwatches for navigation in open cockpits at 20 degrees below zero. Their most audacious mission came during the Battle of the Caucasus. German forces had established a heavily defended fuel depot deep behind their lines, protected by searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. The Night Witches developed what they called the Devil's Gambit. One pilot would deliberately attract searchlights and flak, flying erratic patterns while her sisters glided in from other directions. On August 31st, 1943, they destroyed the depot using this tactic, robbing German tanks of fuel just as Soviet forces launched their counteroffensive. The final statistics tell a story that still astounds military historians. The Night Witches flew over 30,000 combat missions, dropped 23,000 tons of bombs, and lost only 30 crews in combat. They became so feared that the Luftwaffe automatically awarded an Iron Cross to any pilot who managed to shoot one down. These women had taken obsolete aircraft, tactical limitations, and gender prejudice and forged them into one of the most effective combat units in aviation history. They proved that sometimes the deadliest predators are the ones you never see coming. Shield-Maidens, Viking warriors who redefined combat and gender roles. The sword lay undisturbed for over 1,000 years, surrounded by the trappings of a high-ranking warrior. A battle axe, armor-piercing arrows, 2 sacrificed horses, and a full set of game pieces used for tactical planning. When archaeologists opened this prestigious tomb at Birka in 1889, they naturally assumed they had found a Viking military commander. It would take 128 years and a DNA test to shatter every preconception about power in the Norse world. This renowned warrior was a woman, and she was not an anomaly. The Birka warrior, as she became known, had earned her command position through combat prowess. Analysis of her skeleton revealed evidence of sword strikes and healed battle wounds. More telling were the marks on her collarbones and arms, the distinctive stress patterns that come from years of sword fighting and archery. She had lived the life recorded in the sagas, where Shield-Maidens led war bands and earned their place in Valhalla through steel and skill. Contemporary accounts from the enemies of the Norse paint a picture of terror when these female warriors took the field. An Arab diplomat, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, wrote of encountering them on the Volga River. They fight with such ferocity that their male counterparts seem gentle by comparison. I saw one cleave a man from shoulder to hip with a single stroke, then laugh as she claimed his weapons as tribute. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a Shield-Maiden warband that captured York in 869, describing them as wolves in women's form who fought with unnatural skill. Their training began young, as evidenced by children's graves containing both dolls and weapons, a reflection of a culture that saw no contradiction between femininity and combat skill. Recent analysis of Viking training grounds has revealed something remarkable. The practice sword marks on wooden posts show techniques that could only have been made by warriors of different heights and strengths, suggesting that combat training was adapted for various body types rather than standardized for male physiques. The Shield-Maiden's most devastating innovation was the wave breaker formation, first documented during raids on Frankish territories. They would position their strongest warriors at the front of the shield wall, but unlike traditional Norse tactics, they would suddenly open gaps in their line. When enemy forces charged through these apparent weaknesses, hidden warriors would emerge from kneeling positions behind the shields, attacking with spears from unexpected angles. The Frankish casualties from these encounters were so high that local lords began paying tribute rather than face these daughters of Odin in open battle. Archaeological finds from Dublin to Constantinople have revealed the Shield-Maidens' influence on military technology. They modified traditional Norse sword grips for better control with a lighter touch, developed specialized arrowheads that could pierce mail armor at angles male archers rarely attempted, and created a new form of leather armor reinforcement that allowed for greater mobility. These innovations spread throughout the Viking world, adopted by male warriors who recognized their effectiveness. Their most dramatic confirmed historical appearance came during the siege of Constantinople in 860. Byzantine records describe Norse women fighting alongside men on the longships, using grappling hooks and axes to scale the mighty walls. The defenders were so shocked by their presence that several towers were captured before organized resistance could be mounted. Emperor Michael III himself wrote that these northern women fight as if Athena herself had trained them, high praise from a culture that generally dismissed female warriors as fantasy. The Shield-Maidens' legacy was nearly erased by later Christian chroniclers, who found the idea of female military commanders incompatible with their worldview. But the archaeological evidence tells a different story. One of a society where combat skill transcended gender, where women could rise to the highest military ranks through proven ability, and where some of the most feared warriors in European history were those who shattered not just enemy lines, but the very concept of gender-restricted warfare. The Trung Sisters, Vietnam's female liberation force. In 40 CE, Chinese General Ma Yuan, the wave queller who had pacified rebellions across the Han Empire, faced something unprecedented on the Red River Delta. His scouts reported an army led by two sisters who rode into battle on war elephants, commanding a force where women officers led from the front lines. Trung Trak and Trung Ni had assembled a military force that would challenge every assumption about power in ancient Southeast Asia. Born into the warrior class of the Lac Lords, the sisters had mastered both martial arts and military strategy from childhood. But their true genius lay in organization. They transformed the traditional Vietnamese system of martial arts schools into a military hierarchy, with female masters becoming battlefield commanders. Each officer trained her own unit in specialized combat techniques, creating what military historians now recognize as one of the earliest examples of specialized infantry forces in Southeast Asian warfare. Their most effective innovation was the Dragon's Breath tactic, a complex combination of elephant cavalry and ambush warfare that devastated Chinese formations. The sisters would lead a frontal assault on war elephants, while their female officers led light infantry units through the dense jungle terrain to strike enemy supply lines. This two-pronged approach forced Chinese commanders to either divide their forces or risk losing their supplies. Either choice proved lethal. The army's rapid expansion stunned contemporary chroniclers. Within months of raising their standard of rebellion, the sisters had recruited over 30,000 soldiers, many of them women who had suffered under Chinese rule. They liberated 65 fortified cities in a lightning campaign that drove the Han forces back across the border. Each victory brought more recruits, drawn by the sisters' reputation for tactical brilliance and their promise of a Vietnam free from foreign domination. Chinese military records reluctantly praise the sisters' innovative use of terrain. Their forces would seemingly materialize from the jungle, strike with devastating precision, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. They developed a system of mobile supply bases hidden in the highlands, allowing their army to operate far from conventional support structures. This network was so effective that elements of it were still being used by Vietnamese forces 2,000 years later. The scale of their success is preserved in Han military documents. In less than 2 years, they had destroyed 6 Chinese armies and established an independent kingdom. General Ma Yuan, in a memorial to the emperor, wrote, "These women fight like demons and lead like sages. Their soldiers would rather die than surrender, and their officers show tactical skills that would honor the greatest generals." High praise from a man who had spent his career crushing rebellions. Their greatest victory came at the Battle of Longbak, where they faced a Han army nearly twice their size. The sisters positioned their forces behind a series of concealed earthworks, creating killing zones that fragmented the Chinese advance. When the Han commander committed his reserves to what he thought was a breakthrough, the sisters unleashed their elephant cavalry into his exposed flanks. The resulting rout became legendary. A professional Han army of 20,000, scattered by a force led by women whom they had dismissed as barbarian rebels. The sisters' military innovations outlived their eventual defeat. Their system of combined arms warfare, integrating elephant cavalry with light infantry and guerrilla tactics, became a template for Southeast Asian armies. Their organizational structure, which emphasized individual unit initiative and specialized combat roles, influenced military thinking throughout the region. Most significantly, they established a tradition of female military leadership that would resurface throughout Vietnamese history, proving that the capacity for tactical genius and battlefield courage transcends gender. The Women's Protection Units, YPJ, revolutionizing modern urban warfare. The ISIS commander in Kobani had a problem. His forces controlled 70% of the city, but they were being decimated by snipers they couldn't see and ambushes they couldn't predict. More troubling was the psychological impact on his men. Islamic State fighters believed that being killed by a woman would deny them paradise. By early 2015, they were about to discover that the YPJ had turned this belief into a weapon more potent than bullets. Naran Afrin, a 20-year-old YPJ commander, had transformed urban warfare through necessity. With limited ammunition and outdated weapons, her units developed a system of coordinated micro-teams that could control entire city blocks with minimal resources. They created mobile sniper nests in bombed-out buildings, synchronized their attacks with precise timing, and used their opponent's own propaganda against them. Every shot was preceded by a battle cry that announced their presence, ensuring ISIS fighters knew exactly who was hunting them. Their most effective innovation was the ghost house technique. YPJ units would fortify a building's ground floor, then create hidden passages between adjacent structures. When ISIS forces would concentrate on the obvious strongpoint, YPJ fighters would emerge from seemingly solid walls to strike from multiple directions. In Kobani alone, this tactic accounted for over 300 ISIS casualties while sustaining minimal losses. The Battle of Raqqa showcased their mastery of psychological warfare. YPJ units broadcast recordings of women's laughter during night operations, followed by precision strikes on enemy positions. They left notes in Kurdish and Arabic. "We are the women you fear. There is nowhere in this city we cannot reach you." ISIS fighters began refusing to hold positions overnight, terrified of the female warriors who seemed to move through walls like spirits. Their training regime defied conventional military doctrine. Rather than standardizing their tactics, YPJ commanders developed a system they called adaptive combat. Each fighter was taught to modify their fighting style based on their physical strengths. Smaller women became urban infiltration specialists, while stronger fighters formed the core of their rapid response teams. This flexible approach proved devastatingly effective in close-quarter combat, where traditional military units often struggled. The YPJ's most sophisticated tactical development was their three-layer defense system, first deployed in Tel Abyad. The outer layer consisted of mobile sniper teams that would harass enemy forces. The middle layer utilized their ghost house networks for ambush and counterattack. The inner layer was a flexible reserve that could reinforce any position through underground tunnels. This defense-in-depth approach allowed a YPJ force of just 500 fighters to hold off an ISIS assault of over 2,000. Their reputation reached such heights that by late 2016, ISIS had created special units specifically to counter YPJ tactics. These units proved ineffective because they were based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The YPJ's strength wasn't in their specific techniques, but in their ability to constantly evolve their strategy. As one captured ISIS commander noted in his interrogation, "How do you fight an enemy that treats every defeat as a lesson and every victory as a chance to innovate?" The true measure of their impact lies not just in territory reclaimed or enemies defeated, but in how they've revolutionized modern combat doctrine. Their techniques for urban warfare have been studied by military academies worldwide. Their method of integrating local intelligence networks with military operations has become a model for counterinsurgency operations. Most significantly, they've proven that in the complex landscape of modern warfare, diversity in combat units isn't just a social statement. It's a tactical advantage that can mean the difference between victory and defeat. The future of female combat units. Lessons from history. The Pentagon's newest combat simulation facility in 2024 runs an unusual program. It combines tactical innovations from female fighting forces throughout history into a single theoretical battle plan. When tested against traditional military doctrine, this hybrid approach consistently outperforms conventional tactics. The project's name? The Dahomey Protocol, a fitting tribute to the warriors who first proved that innovation often comes from those the establishment overlooks. Modern military planners have begun to recognize what history's most successful female combat units understood intuitively. Warfare isn't about brute force, but about adapting, innovating, and turning perceived weaknesses into strengths. The Night Witch's use of obsolete aircraft to achieve tactical superiority, the Shield-Maidens' development of flexible combat techniques, the Trung Sisters' mastery of asymmetric warfare, and the YPJ's revolutionary urban combat doctrine all point to a fundamental truth. Combat effectiveness stems from intelligence, adaptability, and skill, rather than conformity to traditional military standards. The future of warfare is already being shaped by these lessons. Special Forces units worldwide have begun incorporating the YPJ's adaptive combat techniques. Military academies study the Night Witch's missions to understand how to overcome technological disadvantages. Urban warfare doctrine increasingly reflects the ghost house approach. Perhaps most significantly, military planners have started to recognize that combat unit diversity in size, strength, speed, and approach creates tactical advantages that homogeneous units cannot match. As artificial intelligence and autonomous systems reshape the battlefield, the qualities that made these female units exceptional, adaptability, innovation, and the ability to turn limitations into advantages, will become even more crucial. The future belongs not to the strongest or the most technologically advanced, but to those who can think differently about the nature of combat itself. In this light, history's female warriors weren't just ahead of their time, they were showing us the future. The greatest legacy of these units lies not in the battles they won, but in the proof they provided, that military excellence knows no gender, that innovation often comes from the margins, and that the future of warfare belongs to those who dare to break with convention. As one modern military strategist noted, we didn't study these units because they were women. We studied them because they were revolutionary, and revolution is the future of warfare.